So, Terry, would you pray for our time? Thanks.
In just 2 seconds.
Rachel and Juan Carlos. We saved you 2 seats in the front.
Yeah, 2 seats in the front. It's awkward.
No, I just asked Terry to pray. You missed my golf story is all. It was very missable. Yeah. So, ouch. I've heard those stories before.
Well, Jesus, thank you so much for tonight. Lord, thank you so much that Dave is feeling better. Lord, we just pray over our time, God, and we just pray that your Holy Spirit would illuminate truth through this work, Lord, that C.S. Lewis has done, just peeling back the veil, Lord, on the supernatural and, Lord, the schemes of the enemy and how he's trying to derail us, Lord. And so, God, I just pray for clarity for Dave and delivery, but also, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would just minister to our hearts, God. We want to be closer to you because of this. And so, Lord, help us wrestle with these things, and Lord, just pray that you would illuminate truth in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Excuse me. Guess I'm not better. We're going to start off by looking at a couple of verses. Most of this is not going to. Most of these events aren't going to be teaching times, but I want to get us off on the right foot. A couple of qualifications before we get too far along. This is not a class on demonology. We're not going to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how the demon world works. We're going to go with the Screwtape model here. I think it's accurate in a significant percentage of human interaction with the demonic, and I think some of the scripture would back that up, but we're not going to try and figure out what principalities and powers are and all that sort of thing. We won't spend any time on that, nor is it a class on deliverance. I do believe there's a place and a time for deliverance. This class is not about that. This conversation isn't. This book is not about that. So whatever it means to be possessed by a demon, we will not address. This book does not approach anything that has to do with possession or deliverance in that way. And so this is not that kind of class. This is trying to understand, based on this book, what is it that the enemy can do to us, and what's his objectives? What's he trying to accomplish? And even though it's an old book, I do think it's about as close as you can come to the primary means that the enemy uses to derail Christians. I remember when the book This Present Darkness came out, and it got a lot of publicity, and it was a very exciting book to read. I think it's a little less accurate than this. It verges more into heavy oppression at the least, and possession in times. And somebody's phone, is that my phone? That would be awkward.
Somebody else's phone ringing in your pocket.
It is somebody. It's a spam call, though. At least it was mine. So if you've ever read This Present Darkness, again, it's a very different model than the Screwtape letters. And so just keep that in mind, that there are other models out there that with varying levels of accuracy to Scripture. So up on the screens, we're going to have to use the screens. I did not want to stream this. We got several phone calls saying, would you please stream this? So we're going to. I'm simply going to make one comment, not to anyone here in this room, but to that camera there. I would much rather have you here, and it's not dark out. I understand not wanting to drive in the dark. We're here, about 19 of us. Come join us next week. We would love to have you. I'm not positive we will stream after this week. This introduction, I think, is worth streaming. After that, we may not do it. So we'd love to have you here with us. That's the end of the public service announcement. Until next week. So, all right, so we're going to look at a couple, 5 technically, verses. The first one, and you've got a Bible. Oh, this would be a better way to do this. Let's actually hand the sheets out.
Good.
I think that there's enough. That's 2 pages. So take the 2 pages, and they're 2 double-sided pages, but it's not double-sided material. Most of it is places for you to write later. So the front page at the top should say There should be Bible verses on the first page up there. There's a larger stack going around this direction. There should be 2 pages. There's
Two double-sided pages.
2 double-sided pages, yeah. So
Juan Carlos, do you have a copy of the book?
I have a PDF.
Did you guys get?
he has it
No, I
online.
just got, these are stuff. Thank you.
Someone take very.
I brought it from you.
All right, pages are still working their way around.
Oh, Dave, we need some more copies.
They're coming this way,
Oh, they're coming this way.
I believe.
I don't know. Now, did I get that? Oh, yeah, here.
Are we
Oh,
out?
wait a minute, I'm sorry, I think I got a page stuck. Here, Steve. This is the first page right here. Steve didn't get the second page.
What's that?
Steve didn't get the second page because I added.
Well, next time we'll do sign-ups. Those of you who didn't pay, don't get a sheet.
No, give me more.
Well, Judy will run off a couple of more. But in the meantime, all we're going to be doing is looking at the verses that are on there. If you guys are sharing a page, you guys are sharing a page, you guys can look on together, and the rest of you can look on the screens, and you'll know every one of these verses. So the first one is Ephesians 4, verse 12. And what I'm going to ask you to do after I read the verse is simply think about, what does this tell us about what the spirit world is like? What does this tell us about what the spirit world is like? Because that's what this book is representing. And the verse is, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities and against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms." So what does that verse tell us? Anybody can answer? What do we learn from Ephesians 4:12? It is 6:12. You're right. That's the typo. When I got home from my golf trip, I transferred everything over. So it's 6:12. So you can write a little 6 there. What does it tell us about the spirit world?
Well, it tells me that we're not looking at the individual person, but the spirit behind that person.
Okay, so if you're looking at another person, something that might be happening, it's not necessarily them. There's something behind it.
Yes.
Okay, all right, yep.
And that it's real.
There's real spirit world. Okay, yep.
And it seems to be ranks of authority.
Seems to be what?
Be ranks of authority.
Ranks of authority.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, okay.
Powers and authorities and rulers.
Okay. Anything else in there? I agree with all those. I think it's important to recognize the Bible does actually say that there's a spirit world we can't see, and it's a spirit world that we battle against. So whatever it is that we're dealing with, there's a spiritual world behind that. It doesn't mean we don't have responsibility. It doesn't mean we don't have any input in it, but there is some motivating force behind it that has power. It's important to recognize that the words that, and Betty commented on this, how the authority system works, I have no idea, and I don't think the Bible says too much about it, but there's very clearly power involved there. There's powers and spiritual forces that are involved in a struggle, and that word struggle is not a passive word at all. It's a very aggressive word, that we have a fight against a spiritual world that is powerful. So we'll move on to John 8:44. I think that is the right verse this time. The devil, and I put a ... because there's some filler in there, was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So what do we learn about the devil there? The Bible doesn't say a lot about the devil. We've filled in a lot of blanks. Some of it we've stolen from Milton, some we've adapted from Scripture. But what does this verse tell us about the devil?
Well, he doesn't tell the truth.
He doesn't tell the truth.
The more you walk with him, I think you discern it.
Okay, yeah.
But he's also a roaring lion. He comes up and sneaks up on deer. I'm not saying you get it all the time. But
Okay. What do you think that means, that he's a liar?
The truth is not in him.
Okay, and what does that mean?
All he can do is lie to us.
Okay, All he can do is lie to us. Have you ever told a lie? Anybody know what the best way to lie is?
Get as close to the truth.
Get as close to the truth as you can. That's why I'm careful on that there's no truth in him. His outcome has no truthful intention. But much of what he says, I think, is wrapped in truth and then twists it so that we begin to think incorrectly. If somebody just comes up to you and says the sky is green, we're not going to buy into it, right? If somebody comes up to you and says the world's flat, most of us are not going to buy into it. But if you use mostly truth, then you can get to a place where, and when we're looking at Screwtape letters, it's very interesting to see how Screwtape deals with truth and lies. And so we'll come back to that. Ephesians 4:16. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, and this is in that armor of God section. Take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. What do you think that means? What do you learn from that? What do you think that, there's only one piece in here that talks about the enemy at all. What's it tell us about him?
Shooting flaming arrows.
He shoots flame, and why do you think he says flaming arrows? Why use that analogy?
It's about the violent attack usually.
Violent, we're at war with him.
It's destructive.
It's destructive.
Hit our weak spot.
Hit our weak spot. That's what arrows are targeted, right? And they're flaming. Why would you shoot a flaming arrow at something instead of just an arrow?
It causes more destruction than just where it hits.
Yeah.
It kind of spreads.
It spreads. It continues to do damage after it hits. And that's, I think, why when Paul's talking about him, when he attacks us, this damage that he tries to do, he tries to put things in there, kind of like planting bad seeds in some of Jesus' parables, right? He's sending something at us. It's not just a shot, but it's designed to continue to do damage. And that's what lies do so often, is continue to do damage to us. James 4:7-8. Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. What do we learn from that verse? I need a little more light. Okay. What do we learn from that? Just about the devil.
He's trying to get us to submit to him.
Okay, he's trying to get us to submit to him. So we're given an alternative. Is he insurmountable? Can he?
It says we can resist him.
Says we can resist him. I mean, I would not want to get in a wrestling match with the devil.
Can we resist him without God?
I don't know. What does it say?
No.
And if we got to submit first to God. So I would say yes, we have to have God with us.
Okay.
to
Yeah.
resist him.
So in that context, that just us on our own got nothing, right? So it leads in with submit yourself to God, and then you can actually resist the devil. By yourself? Probably not, because if you look closely, and when stuff is sandwiched or stuff is repeated, he says beginning of the verse and the end of the verse. Submit yourself to God, come near to God. And in the middle of that is resist the devil. So Grant's question is an important one. Can you do it on your own? Not based on this verse, and I don't think so.
The thing I like about this is it's so positive. He will flee from you.
Mhm.
And it says, it reminds us to come, it says come near to God. He's telling us
Mhm.
very clearly, come near to me, and he's inviting us again.
So you're getting a tool
Yeah.
on how to deal with him.
Yeah, I love this verse.
Yeah.
I use it a lot. I've looked at it.
Okay, the fifth verse, last one we're going to look at for now. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Excuse me. What do we got from that?
Well, that's such a visual picture too,
Mhm.
for me. He's looking around.
What do you picture?
Well, he's scoping the field. He sees who he can get.
Mhm.
Who's vulnerable? Who's gonna, where's my armor? He's just looking around, meaning he's moving the guy, he's always in search of somebody, he's
Do
testing.
lions eat healthy animals very often? They know. Who do they look for?
Half dead ones, sweet ones.
Yeah, they look for the weak,
Weak
the
ones,
young, the ailing, because they're easier targets. It's a healthy animal is usually pretty successful at pushing off lions. Devil here, supposed to be alert and sober-minded. Someone else, when you hear that he prowls around, what does that evoke in your thinking?
Sneaky.
What's that?
He's sneaky.
Sneaky, yeah. He's not walking up face to face, right? He's crawling around in the brush.
Have you ever watched a cat stalk something? Or
Mm-hmm.
it's like he's stalking,
Yeah,
can do it sneakily.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to take those 5 verses into Screwtape letters. We want to keep them in our mind as we're looking at it. I'm just going to read this piece that is in your handout. I'm going to read it partly for the folks who are online because they don't have it. There's a couple of comments I want to mention before we move into the book. The overall book of Screwtape letters is difficult to read due to its style, its dated cultural setting, and C.S. Lewis' expansive vocabulary and proclivity to complex sentences. I tried to do my own little hard-to-read sentence there. Thank you very much. I appreciate the recognition. I want to recognize from the beginning, this book's not easy to read. It often gets thought of as like a teenage book. It is not. C.S. Lewis, outside of the Chronicles of Narnia, it doesn't write teenage-level stuff. It's hard to read. It's dated. One friend here sent me a list of questions of just at the end saying, huh? After quotes and statements. He uses words we don't use. He uses images we don't use that are dated to his time. He's a much brighter person than I am. And so there are times when it's, man, anybody ever read My Utmost for His Highest? Oswald Chambers.
Yes.
It's a wonderful, wonderful devotional. And 50% of the time or more, I have no idea what he's talking about. I will read it and get done and go, okay, I know there's more here. Sometimes I have time to go back in and push harder. After years, I'll read one, it's like, man, I've never read that before, because all of a sudden I'll understand something. I think you have to read Screwtape letters like you read Oswald Chambers. You've got to be willing to go, I don't get this, and that's okay. You're not going to understand everything that takes place in every one of these letters. I don't. When I started reading back through it again, because we were going to do this group, I thought, man, what was I thinking? Because there's hard concepts in here, and there's cultural things that aren't necessarily. Judy and I are reading it together, and there's a couple of times we're like, I don't even know if I agree with that, and that's okay. It's not the Bible, but it's a little bit like the Bible, where when you read it a few times, some more lights come on. And so I would encourage you, the first time you're reading, to not stop. Just keep reading. If somebody had made the comment, I'm kind of breezing through this, that's fine. It won't help much. It's like breezing through a cookbook. Like, oh yeah, I remember they made biscuits. But read through the letter once, and then go back and go, okay, I don't understand this. There's probably words to look up. There's several words that I was looking at. You're like, oh, that's what that means. I remember hearing it once. So read it one time, then go back through, and if you're still not getting it, maybe read it one more time and then move on. If we don't have to get every one of them, we'll talk about some of them here, but not all of them. It's okay to not understand everything. So it says, for that reason, this book cannot be read quickly. Each chapter of the book is a letter from a senior demon, Screwtape, to a low-level fiend, Wormwood. The fiend has been put in charge of winning back a recent convert to Christianity. The entire book is Screwtape's instructions to the lower-level fiend on how to subtly move the new convert away from his faith. And that's something to keep in mind, that his goal is to very slowly slide him away so that he doesn't ever notice. If you just have the oxygen in the room cut off, you'll start to panic. If the oxygen level just fades very slowly, you don't really notice. The next thing you know, you fall asleep. That's what Screwtape, he's trying to step on the air hose a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. We are shown the kingdom of darkness approach to win souls away from Christ, not through force or power, but by using human weaknesses and tendencies which are common to mankind to slowly redirect him. The overall strategy of Screwtape is distraction of the believer, which leads to distance from God. It is his tactics which we are looking to see and understand. Each chapter or letter is a specific tactic in the enemy's uses. For us, the reader, we have 3 jobs to focus on. So I want to very quickly explain the difference between what a strategy is and a tactic. You might just use the words interchangeably, but they're not. A strategy is the big picture. How are we going to try and do this? In World War II, the Russians' strategy was just throw as many human beings and as many bad tanks at the Germans, and just there's a war of attrition. We're just going to keep losing guys and hope that they lose more than they're willing to lose. That's how the Russians fought it. The American strategy was, we're going to stay out of it as long as we can, let them kill each other, we'll come on and look like the winners at the end. The German strategy was, we're going to make the best equipment possible, be the fastest moving, best troops, and believe that we can win. And they did early on. Tactics, very different. A tactic is, how are you going to go about accomplishing that bigger goal? So in this book, the strategy is distraction. The strategy is sleep. The strategy is boredom. The strategy is confusion. The tactics are all the things that he does in each chapter. We're going to just distract him with lunch. We're going to distract him with worldly wisdom. And so every chapter, of which there's 32 or 33, each little letter is a different tactic to this bigger strategy of just distract him into oblivion. That's what he's trying to do. And he's doing it thing after thing after thing. So that's what he's trying to and how he's trying to go about it. We'll try and figure that out. So here, the first three here, numbers 1, 2, and 3, these are the things for us to focus on in each chapter, and you'll notice that the rest of these pages are just 1, 2, 3, and then A, B for each chapter. First one, what is Screwtape trying to accomplish in the believer? What condition is he trying to create or increase? So let's say that what he's trying to do is get the person to be self-righteous. So that's what Screwtape's trying to accomplish is self-righteousness in the person. So the second question is, how is Screwtape trying to accomplish this? What is he emphasizing? And maybe how he does that is he shows other people in the church who are hypocrites. And we've heard this for our entire Christian lives. The church is full of hypocrites. So let's try and get him self-righteous. Let's have him notice all the hypocrites in the church. And then how does this accomplish the intended goal? Why will it be successful? What does that cause? My self-righteousness as I judge others causes pride, which separates me from God. So that's the one, what is he trying to do? 2, how's he trying to do it? And then what does that actually accomplish? So then for us, for learning and discussing, think about these 2 things. How have you experienced this in your own life? B, how can we prepare ourselves to resist this tactic? How can we eliminate it if we see that it already exists? So one of the things I'm going to ask you to consider as you read is, are some of these things present in your life? Are some of those things present as you are walking and you go, wow, that sounds a little bit like me. I do that. And then be able to ask yourself, what's that coming from? And what's it causing in me? And if you see it there, maybe you'll go, I don't see that as a problem. That'll probably show up in another chapter. So make sure that as you're reading the book, it's not a third-person experience. Boy, yeah, I've seen this in that person. Oh, man, ooh, yeah. This very clearly applies to half of our church. We should teach on this. We're trying to read this for ourselves. We're trying to grow in our own faith, trying to limit the ability of the enemy to interfere with us. So, on the second page, you'll see it says chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. We're never going to turn this in. I'm never going to check your sheets for your work or spelling or anything like that. What I hope for is that on the chapters that resonate for you, that you go, oh, this makes some sense, I get this, that you'll fill these in. If you're in a chapter that it's like, I don't have a clue, what I would write there is, I hope we talk about this next week and move on, because there are many, many things. Now, that said, with the person who sent me, I didn't have a chance to reply to the email, but when you get to something, it's like, man, I got nothing. Don't worry about it. You probably can still understand the goal. What I think C.S. Lewis is very good at, I don't think he's great at clarity sometimes, but I think he's very good at individual points. So you can miss some of how he's trying to highlight it and still understand what he's trying to say. So don't give up on the point too quickly, like, man, I don't know what that word means. Go on to chapter 3. See if you can get the main point of what Screwtape's trying, and it usually says it pretty early on. So I'm going to read us chapter 1, I hope. And I put a cough drop in my mouth. Well, that's a golf tee. I'll try to put a cough. So what we're trying to look for in chapter 1, and we've all probably read it, maybe not everybody, is first, what's Screwtape trying to accomplish in the believer? What condition is he trying to create or increase? And then we'll see if we can figure out how he's trying to do that. My dear Wormwood, I note what you say about guiding your patient's reading and taking care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. But are you not being a trifle naive? It sounds as if you supposed that argument was the way to keep him out of the enemy's clutches. So he's on his third sentence here, and he's giving us a little bit of a point, because it's even in italics in my book. It says, it sounds like you suppose that argument was the way to keep him out of the enemy's clutches. The first confusing thing for me in this book is it keeps referring to God as the enemy. It takes me a long time, because I'm so enculturated to think that devil's enemy. And it's like, well, wait a minute, he's arguing against his own people. No, God is the enemy in this book. Don't allow that to affect you too much. It sounds as if you suppose that argument was the way to keep him out of God's clutches. That might have been so if he had lived a few centuries earlier. At that time, the humans still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not. And if it was proved, they really believed it. They still connected thinking with doing and were prepared to alter their way of life as a result of a chain of reasoning. Anybody want to take a shot at what he's saying up till this point?
He's saying things have changed.
He's certainly saying things have changed, because he's referring back to an older time when something was different. What's changed?
People are more skeptical.
People are more skeptical, okay, yeah.
Wasn't he saying that people are less searching for the truth, for what's true?
Certain or searching?
Searching.
Okay, yeah. No, I think he is. I think what he's trying to set up at this point is that the modern world does not believe in truth. And that's why when he starts in and saying, it sounds like you think argument, the goal of an argument is to get to truth, right? In a legal system, an argument is being presented. In theory, both sides in a legal are supposed to be presenting truthful statements, and then you decide what's actually true, right? So this argument idea that in Lewis's world, we have, in some ways, lost even the idea of argument. That an argument is now just for me to present my ideas and you to present yours. It's not to establish fact that we would both then go, oh, this is what's true. Yeah. And because our society is so much that way, this can be a little confusing. He's saying there is a truth, and people don't believe that anymore. That's not even what they're looking for. So we'll continue on. But what with the weekly press and other such weapons, we have largely altered that. Now, this was way before social media. Imagine the lunch he would have had with that. Your man has been accustomed, ever since he was a boy, to having a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together in his head. There's his point of what society has become. You can function with incompatible philosophies all going around at the same time. And talk to believers about what they believe about God and eternity and sin and Christian church models this perfectly. You can believe in Jesus died on the cross and not believe in sin or not believe in hell. I mean, if there's no hell, there's no reason for the cross, right? I mean, there's no reason for the Son of God to die on a cross. But the number of people that believe in Jesus that don't believe in hell, now what hell is, not our conversation. Incompatible ideas that we just allow to float. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true or false, but as academic or practical, outworn or contemporary, conventional or ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. What does he mean by jargon?
Nonsense.
What's that?
Nonsense.
Nonsense. It's a good word. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nonsensical thoughts, and jargon. Christianese often can be jargon. There's lots of things. It's like just get them onto anything that doesn't have to do with actual truth, and I think nonsense is a great way to actually sum it up. Don't waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true. Our society, if you're not aware, has made a major shift at the beginning of the 20th century into materialism. We didn't have the capacity for materialism before mass production came online. Once it does, the Western world, very much geared towards materialism, and it became a philosophy, much more than just an economic system. It became a philosophy that our lives are defined by what we own and what we accomplish and those sorts of things. Don't try to make him think it's true. Make him think it is strong or stark or courageous. That is the philosophy of the future. That's the sort of thing he cares about. And if you read much about our society today and the philosophical ideas and, hey, this is your truth and that's great for you, and that's great for you. And you can be a Buddhist, Islamic, Christian, and hey, if that's what works for you, that's fine. The idea of each of us can develop our own truth has developed over the last 100 years very much. And he's seeing the early pieces of this, C.S. Lewis was. The trouble about argument is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's ground. And I'm going to forward us here, if I can. Oops. I skipped moving our verses forward, didn't I? There we go. So that question is what we're going to try to answer. Man, I'm way behind on our slides. There we go. I forgot I was even doing it. Sorry about that for you online. Show up next week. What's that?
I took the slides off.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. The trouble about argument is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's own ground. What does that mean? This idea is the heart of this one letter.
God is truth.
What's that?
God is truth.
God is truth, okay. Yeah.
They talk about the Holy Spirit as the Spirit of truth.
Mm-hmm. Spirit of truth is there.
And the purpose of argument is to find the truth.
Purpose, yeah. Purpose arguments to find the truth. Is there anybody who knows all truth? God knows all truth. Is there anybody who doesn't use the truth? Enemy? So, and this is why Screwtape is so anxious about this, that you have this belief that truth doesn't matter anymore. What a perfect belief system for the enemy to just float around and manipulate people, because truth doesn't matter. Why? There's no better playground than if you're going to go, that's true for you, but it's not true for me, and that's all good. If truth is God, if God designed truth, then with the Screwtape, Wormwood's goal of, I'm going to get him involved in argument, try and convince him that he's got the right idea. No, don't convince him that he's right, because then you're going to have him looking for truth. He can argue too, meaning God. Whereas in really practical propaganda of the kind I'm suggesting, he has been shown for centuries to be greatly the inferior of our Father below. Yes, I really like that line because it's the devil talking a little trash about God in a way that I can picture him doing. He is, in terms of propaganda, what the devil's trying to do, he's shown himself to be inferior, which is true. God only speaks truth, right? Propaganda is supposed to manipulate and control and guide you to these weird ideas and things that aren't true. And God doesn't need propaganda. He just uses truth. And so in the devil's and in Screwtape's view, the enemy, God, is really bad at propaganda, which is actually true. The church is pretty good at propaganda. God's bad at it. By the very act of arguing, you awake the patient's reason. And once it is awake, who can foresee the result? What does reason? What does that term mean?
You ask yourself, does this make sense? Is this true?
Does this make sense? Is it true? Yeah.
Discerning right from wrong.
Discerning right from wrong. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's trying to, when the reason is going, it's like, give me the reason for this. And if somebody comes and tells you, I did this, well, what was the reason why you did it? I don't care that you did something right or wrong. What was the reason? The purpose that's behind it, the thinking that's behind it, because ultimately then that will lead to truth. And I lost my place. Who can foresee the result? Even if a particular train of thought can be twisted so as to end in our favor, you will find that you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of attending to universal issues and withdrawing his attention from the stream of immediate sense and experiences. What is there? He's saying here, even if you can get him on a bad idea, if he's doing it for the wrong reason, which is for us would be the right reason, you get him on the wrong idea, but he's searching for truth. If he's on that bent, I want to know what's true. Maybe you can distract him as the enemy for a little while, but he's going to end up being drawn back to truth. If you can just keep him from looking for truth, we'll be in good shape. And then he finishes this up. The fatal habit of attending to universal issues, that's, you don't want him to be looking. Universal issues means these are true things always. God stuff. And withdraw his attention from the stream of immediate sense experiences. What are immediate sense experiences?
Living in the moment in the flesh.
Living in the moment, okay, in the flesh, yeah. What's that?
Living in feelings.
Living with feelings. I feel good
By
when I'm
feelings.
But yeah, trying to feel good. It feels really good to say there's no hell, doesn't it? I would so much love to go out and talk to people and say, hey, you can either have a relationship with God or you'll just disappear when you die. That'd be so much easier. Because people, I don't think, come to God because of hell. I think they come to God because of love for Jesus. And I would much rather be able to talk to people that I know don't really want anything to do with Jesus and go, you know, it'll be all right. You're just going to fade away. But that's not what's true. I don't want a world that I'm looking for sense experiences. So he says to Wormwood, your business is to fix his attention on the stream. Teach him to call it real life, and don't let him ask what he means by real. You ever heard anybody say, you know, I'm going to take a couple of months and go to Europe and try and find myself? I'm going to go look for what's real and what's true. And yet, you know, that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for what makes them feel good. How can I find my center me? And our world and all of the mutations of truth-seeking have come up with lots of distracting different things. Somebody asked me the other day if yoga was demonic. Was it demonic? No, if yoga was from the devil, I think was the word that they used. No. Demonic yoga is from the devil. If you just want to stretch and breathe deep and try and clear your mind, when I golf, if I try and get everything out of my mind because there's like 16 things you have to do right every time you swing. So I just, okay, stop thinking. That's not demonic. But if I started going, okay, spirit of the universe, okay, help my club swing straight, then I got a problem, right? So clearing your mind, not bad. Stretching, not bad, unless you're not limber. But teach him to call it real life. And don't let him ask what he means by real. Because if he's not looking for real truth, then you've got him off on the sidecar, and that's what you're looking for. Remember, he is not like you, a pure spirit. Now, I find this section a little bit confusing. Never having been a human, and then if I could give C.S. Lewis one piece of advice, it'd be don't put in parenthetical things. Oh, that abominable advantage of the enemies. So, never having been a human, you don't realize how enslaved they are to the pressure of the ordinary. There's a little booklet that we have out sometimes called The Tyranny of the Urgent. That these weird little things in life become so urgent for us, and the real things become minimized because we're so busy. Oh, I got to get my bills paid, and I got to get gas for my car, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. That's what he's talking about here. You don't realize how enslaved they are to the pressure of the ordinary. I once had a patient, a sound atheist, who used to read in the British Museum. Now he's given an example of what he was talking about all the way along. One day he sat reading. I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go the wrong way. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in a moment. So that's God coming in. He sees a train of thought going towards God for a second. So God shows up, tries to encourage him that way. Before I knew where I was, I saw my 20 years of work beginning to totter. If I had lost my head and begun to attempt a defense by argument, I should have been undone. So he's saying if I had tried to convince him of truth, going up against God, who is truth, I would have lost, and I would have lost this guy. But I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of man which I had best under my control and suggest that it was just about time he had some lunch. You know who I thought of when I was reading through this, before I went on my golf trip, I read back through this, who I thought of was Sierra. Apologize for throwing you under the bus, but her 3-day fast Protect me, Lord. That distraction. Oh, I want some food. Now I'm probably gonna be stuck on golf analogies today because I just got back from golfing. But I was actually on the next to the last hole. We hadn't eaten very much. We were this morning. It's on the next to the last hole. I was getting ready to swing, and Harry, who tries to mess me up, says, "Dave, you want a burger or fish and chips?" Because we'd been talking that we were hungry. And I hit the ball into the weeds, just because my brain is like, oh man, I'm just going to hit. It's almost lunchtime. Whack, boom, and another ball down the drain. We are slaves to our system here, and that's what he's talking about. I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of the man which I had best under my control and suggested it was just about time he had some lunch. You want a burger or fish and chips? The enemy presumably made the counter suggestion. And I like this, that he models this as that Satan and Satan's crew can't hear and it's almost like the Charlie Brown and the adults. You remember that? That's what I picture here, that God can speak in a way that the enemy can't even perceive it. He just knows it's happening. The enemy presumably made the counter suggestion. Parentheses, you know how one can never quite overhear what he says to them. That this was more important than lunch. Have you ever had that time where it's like, oh, man, I know I'm learning something here, and I'd love to go watch a movie or whatever it might be, and you've got that decision to make.
Yeah.
Do I press in? 3 days. Do I press in? Nah, I'm going to go get some lunch. At least I think that must have been his line, for when I said, quite, in fact, much too important to tackle at the end of the morning. The patient brightened up considerably, and by the time I had added, much better to come back after lunch and go into it with a fresh mind, he was already halfway to the door. Once he was in the street, the battle was won. I showed him a newsboy shouting the midday paper and a number 73 bus going past, and before he reached the bottom of the steps, I had got him into an unalterable conviction that whatever odd ideas might have come up into a man's head when he was shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life, by which he meant the bus and the newsboy, was enough to show him that all that sort of thing just couldn't be true. He knew he'd had a narrow escape, and in later years was fond of talking about that inarticulate sense for actuality, which is our ultimate safeguard against the aberrations of mere logic. That's a thick sentence to say, those spiritual things, they can kind of, pique your interest once in a while, but once we get back to logic, everything's fine. That's if you distill that down, that's what he's saying. It's just distract him with logic because spiritual things can't be real.
But is it distracting him with logic? Isn't it just distracting him with?
Well, he actually says it. That's the only reason.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The aberration.
Yeah. So that logic, rational thought, everything that came in with the enlightenment of those things that the enemy would distract him with, as opposed to what possibly is there really a spirit in there somewhere. He is now safe in our Father's house. That still chills me when I read that. It's like, It sounds so warm, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds like Screwtape possibly cares in some way.
I know, it's kind of.
Yeah, it's a little bit unnerving. You begin to see the point. Thanks to processes which we set at work in them centuries ago, they find it all but impossible to believe in the unfamiliar while the familiar is before their eyes. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Totally.
Right? And I mean, as someone who's been following Christ for years, the familiar is so much more comfortable. When you run into something in Scripture, like, what does that actually mean? How does this work? I don't understand this. I'm going to move back to God so loved the world. Keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, and I mean the real sciences, as a defense against Christianity. It's an interesting thing for him to say because science has moved such a place where it's communicated as though science, you can't believe in science and God at the same time. We've moved far beyond where C.S. Lewis' world was. It was developing to that. Now, if you are any real scientist, you can't possibly believe in God, which isn't true. But that's the plant that's grown out of the seed that C.S. Lewis is talking about. Above all, do not attempt to use science, and I mean the real science, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. There have been sad cases amongst the modern physicists. If he must dabble in science, keep him on economics and sociology. I was offended by this. I taught sociology. Don't let him get away from that invaluable real life. But the best of all is to let him read no science, but to give him a grand general idea that he knows it all, and that everything he happens to have picked up in casual talk and reading is the results of modern investigation. Do remember, you are there to fuddle him. From the way of the young fiend's talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. Such a good ending line, in my opinion, that the young demons think, oh, we're going to teach them truth that will keep them from truth. And you can't, right? I mean, truth is going to lead them to truth. And so the last thing in the world the devil's wanting to do is teach. He's wanting to mislead. He's wanting to get you to think things are true that are not true. So, here's what I'd like you to do, is on your page, second page, there's chapter 1, and then 1 through 3, which are these questions. What was Screwtape trying to accomplish? How is Screwtape trying to accomplish this? And then what does this accomplish in the intended goal? How does this accomplish it? I apologize, I read that wrong. How does this accomplish it? Just 1 through 3. I don't want you to answer A and B yet. We're going to take 6 minutes and see if you can write down something. And there's a box of pens here. Write down something for 1, 2, and 3. And if you don't understand what I mean by 1, 2, or 3, just ask. I'd be happy to try and make it more clear.
Does anyone need extra copies?
Anyone not get a copy? I have a copy if we need one more.
I got
Oh, okay.
Judy made us a bunch of.
Oh, everybody have one now? Okay.
These are the 3 questions, right?
Oh, the questions are up on the screen for those of you playing from home.
All 3 of them? Oh, I see, the 1 and the.
Does that make sense, Marilyn?
Yeah, because each question is what, and the
Yeah.
answer.
Yep.
Okay. I don't want to do it, but.
Can you repeat what we're supposed to do, because I was up there getting.
Sure, just do questions 1 through 3, the ones that are on the first chapter. So that would be on the back.
They're on the TV screen.
Yeah, and they're up here on the screen also.
Oh, okay, then, right, okay.
So the first one, what is Screwtape trying to accomplish in a believer? What is Screwtape wanting to take place inside of him? And then how is he trying to do that?
Well, he's not a believer yet.
He is not yet a believer. Here's a, here, I got it. Okay. about another 30 seconds on those three. All right, a couple of people. What is Screwtape trying to accomplish? What condition is he trying to create or increase? What's he trying to do to this not yet converted soul?
Distract him.
Distract him, yes. How so?
Do you want the house or do you want more? That's question number 2.
Well, it's halfway between 1 and 2. It's how by distract him, like what? I mean, so what does distract him mean? Because in one sense, every chapter is about distracting him.
With the immediate?
Okay, distract him with the immediate. Okay,
His flesh.
his flesh.
His
Okay,
appetite, what
okay,
seems more like real life.
okay. So, what I would argue for the answer to the first one, and there is no wrong answer, and you're not trying to come up with the right answer, but what I would argue is what Screwtape's trying to do is he's trying to get this person to doubt truth.
Yeah.
That what he's trying to accomplish in this specific letter to him is keep him from believing in truth. Now, he'll use different ways to do that, but keep him from believing in truth. And then how we get to the distract him from is the tactic that he's going to use. Hey, go grab lunch, right? So how does Screwtape accomplish this? Distract him. Distract him with what?
The ordinary.
With the ordinary?
The ordinary.
Okay.
The real life.
Okay.
Temporary.
Temporary stuff? Yeah. It could be from as simple as lunch to as complicated as these wide varieties of philosophies and beliefs that deny that there is one truth. He's ultimately trying to get this guy to have his foundation stone not be the truth of God, but that there's lots of different things that are true, that there's this new world of revelation that we're just becoming aware of. And in his time, science was a leading piece of that as we moved into the age of knowledge. So how does he accomplish the intended goal? What did you put for that?
From page 4, it says, "But the best of all is to let him read no science, but to give him a grand general idea that he knows it all."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, and that's the perfect line for the answer to this is that, I've got it. And how many of you have met people? Maybe you would say one sitting in front of you, I don't know. But that sense you can get from particularly young people right when they get out of college or whatever, it's like, man, I got it all figured out. I know what's true here. Or the alternative to that is, I know it's true for me. That's the new line, and not that.
That's what I was
new.
going to say, there's no absolutes.
There's no absolute truth. It's that's good that it works for you. I mean, the number of people that I've heard say that about faith, oh, yeah, that's great that it works for you. I mean, that's because they believe in faith, but they don't believe in Jesus. You can have faith in all kinds of things. It's great that you've got faith in that, and you got faith in evolution or science or whatever it might be. It's great for you. So, in this chapter, get him to doubt truth, because if you can do that, then the rest of things very, very difficult for God to build on it could be anything, belief system. So the second, the A and B, I'm not going to have us do right now because that's for you to do on your own. Maybe sometime we will when we're doing small groups or something, we'll have share where you might have seen that. But for today, what I'd like to do, and to also to get us out here on time, is I want to take a quick look at 2, 3, and 4. If you have something, if you've read it and it's like, hey, I really don't get this, but I want to point out a couple of things from 2, 3, and 4. So if you've got your book there, he starts off, the patient is converted very early in the book, chapter 2. I note with grave displeasure, your patient has become a Christian. And the little humorous pieces, I think, help make this story like, don't indulge in the hope that you'll escape the usual penalties, and he's even hoping that he will want the penalties because he should. In the meantime, let's make the best of the situation. There's no need to despair. Hundreds of these adult converts have been reclaimed after a brief sojourn into the enemy's camp, and they're now with us. And this next line, all the habits of the patient, both mental and bodily, are still in our favor. And so we love the verse, when you get converted, that you're made entirely new and everything's different. Now you're heart of flesh, heart of stone, and all this sorts of stuff. And yet the enemy's coming in here and saying everything that he's used to, everything he's ever done, is geared towards us. And he says, one of our great allies at present is the church itself. Ouch. What a brutal line. Now, to be fair, he's writing in the midst of the Anglican church system of England, which we've got a leg up on them. All right? And then some of the stuff that he describes here is very dated and historical to the time period. And he talks about some of that. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean the church as we see her spread out through all time and space. Not the real church. The rooted in eternity. That I confess is a spectacle that makes our boldest tempters uneasy. So the real church scares the enemy. But fortunately, it is quite invisible to these humans. All your patient sees, and this is the important start of this next idea, is the half-finished sham Gothic erection on the new building estate. When he goes inside, he sees the local grocer with an oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book containing a liturgy. And now he's talking about really the dead nature of the Anglican Church, but it carries over. Liturgy, which neither of them understand, a shabby little book containing corrupt texts on a number of religious lyrics, mostly bad and in very small print. That's their hymnal. I remember busting out the hymnal in one of my earlier churches and wishing we had not. And I had nothing against hymns, but man, you'd open up and it'd turn to hymn 47. It's like I got no idea what this is about. But so that's what he's talking about here. It used to in the Anglican Church, every church would get a list. These are the hymns you do this week. These are the scriptures you read this week. It was very lifeless in many ways. And that's what he's targeting here. When he gets to his pew and looks around, he sees that just that selection of his neighbors whom he has hitherto avoided, all those religious people. You want to lean pretty heavily on those neighbors. Make his mind flit to and fro between an expression like the body of Christ and the actual faces in the next pew. It matters very little, of course, what kind of people the next pew really contains. You may know one of them to be a great warrior on the enemy's side. No matter. Your patient, thanks to our father below, is a fool, provided that any of those neighbors sing out of tune, or have boots that squeak, or double chins, or odd clothes. The patient will quite easily believe that their religion must therefore be somehow ridiculous. At this present stage, you see, he has no idea of Christians in his mind, which he supposes to be spiritual, but which, in fact, is largely pictorial. His mind is full of togas and sandals and armor and bare legs, and the mere fact that these other people in church wear modern clothes is a real, though of course an unconscious, difficulty to him. So the real people there are just hard to grasp. Never let it come to the surface. Never let him ask what he expected them to look like. Keep everything hazy in his mind, and you will have all eternity wherein to amuse yourself by producing in him the peculiar kind of clarity which hell affords. Now look at this next line. Work hard then on the disappointment or anticlimax which is certainly coming to the patient during his first few weeks as a churchman. The enemy allows this, and I'm going to stop here. We're not going to worry about why the enemy allows it right now. What I want to point out, and the one place I disagree with C.S. Lewis only slightly, is I don't think it has to do with just the first few weeks. I think this plagues us throughout our church life. There's people that pop into mind, and it's like, oh man, yeah. And it's whether it's that you know them when they're out there and they smoke and chew and swear or whatever it might be, that when you actually rub up against real Christians, it's like, wow, I would have thought they would have seemed much more holy and righteous and have a halo or whatever it might be. That the battle of dealing with the mundane human being is one of the real battles of going, wow, this Christianity is actually a real thing, because it does change people. But when we'll learn as we go along here, it changes them from the inside. And that's hard for a new person to believe. I'm going to flip over one page. You might have a different book, but I'm on page 8 if you have the real copy. I've been writing hitherto on the assumption that people in the next pew afford no rational ground for disappointment, meaning they don't deserve this judgment. Of course, if they do, if the patient knows that the woman with the absurd hat is a fanatical bridge player, or the man with squeaky boots a miser and an extortioner, your task is that much easier. The reason I point this out is I don't necessarily think it's bridge playing is a sin. In 1940s England, card playing was thought of as a sin. Certainly in the Anglican Church it was, and some churches still. So there will be things like that pop up. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? And we have things now. I remember when Andrew and Zach were in school, and one teacher wouldn't let her kid read Harry Potter, but he would let him read Lord of the Rings. And Andrew's like, how does that make any sense? So we have these weird things in our societies and their societies. Don't let that give you a hang-up. Chapter 2 is about the distraction of believers and how they can cause us to have a struggle with the real transformation that happens in people. We are expecting to see saints, and what we see is saved sinners is really what chapter 2 is about. So we're going to skip on to chapter 3 very quickly. I want to get to chapter 4 because there's a couple things I want to point out. And one is a super hard chapter. But chapter 3 starts off, I'm very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relations with his mother. That's really all we need to read from this chapter. This is where the best work is done by the enemy, right? I mean, the closer someone is to you, the more they get under your skin, and the more you're able to go, they're not very saved. What's the heck's going on with that? And Mom's going to show up sometimes in here, and Mom doesn't sound like a real enjoyable person, but Screwtape's going to push Wormwood to emphasize this guy's self-righteousness. If he can grow self-righteousness in this young believer, he's doomed. And Screwtape knows that. I'm pleased with what you tell me about this man's relations with his mother, but you must press your advantage. The enemy will be working from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of the patient's conduct under the new standard, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. I must confess, I really like Screwtape. You want to get in first, so beat God to the punch. Keep in close touch with our colleague Glubose, and that threw me off the first time I remember reading that. That's the equivalent of Wormwood, who's assigned to someone else, who's in charge of the mother. Build up between you in that house a good settled habit of mutual annoyance, daily pinpricks. The following methods are useful. And again, we don't even need to read any further if you understand what's going on here. Irritation with others. Irritation with people close to you that you're supposed to love and have grace for, even more successful. Now, he says, keep his mind on the inner life. And this part I think is super fascinating. He's going to steer him. Remember, he's not dealing with real truth, but he's dealing a little bit with truth. The inner life matters, but he's trying to say, get this guy so self-righteous and so self-consumed on that inner life that he forgets everything else. He thinks his conversion is something inside him, as his attention is therefore chiefly turned at present to the states of his own mind, or rather to that very expurgated version of them, which is all you should allow him to see. And if you don't know what expurgated means, that means to have purged out the bad. When you flush a toilet, you're expurgating it. So when he's looking at his life, he is therefore chiefly turned at present to the stages of his own mind, that expurgate. So he sees himself as saved and sin is washed away. He's a pure, saintly being, which if any of us have ever been saved in our conscious mind, if you were a sinner and then as opposed to raised as a Christian, that's a little more challenging. But that, oh man, God forgive me of all this stuff. Ooh, it's gone, right? I mean, that's what we're taught. It's gone. And that's how he views himself. And so that's how he's saying, focus on that. Keep him thinking he's perfect now. Encourage this. Keep his mind off the most elementary duties by directing him to the most advanced and spiritual ones. We like this kind of thing. And he's trying to direct him towards, try to make him feel more and more spiritual. Aggravate that most useful human characteristic, the horror and neglect of the obvious. And what he means by that, you ought to read this next sentence. This is a really good sentence. You must bring him to a condition in which he can practice self-examination for an hour without discovering any of those facts about himself. And I have to confess, this reminds me of others, not me. But when I first read this, like, man, this just so reminds me of somebody. And I was like, wait a minute, that's me. I can spend, oh Lord, remove any unclean way from me. Yeah, I'm pretty good actually, and walk away. And that's what Screwtape would want me to think. They're perfectly clear to anyone else who's ever lived in the same house with him or worked in the same office. If I walk away from saying, Lord, clean me out, and I think he already did, all I got to do is ask Jude, hey Judy, how perfect am I? I've never asked you that, have I? Next time. It is no doubt impossible to prevent his praying for his mother. This is such a good spot. But we have means of rendering his prayers innocuous. Make sure they're always very spiritual, that he's concerned with the state of her soul. God, please help that old woman. She obviously doesn't know you. She'd bring her to truth and light and all this, and never praying for her rheumatism. Two advantages will follow. In the first place, his attention will be kept on what he regards as her sins, by which, with a little guidance from you, he can be induced to mean any of her actions which are inconvenient or irritating to himself. Okay, I'm going to stop there for chapter 3 because it's really pretty clear, I think, what chapter 3 is trying to do is get him hung up on the hang-ups of other people around him that are close to him. Chapter 2 is about getting bothered by the church. Chapter 3 is getting bothered by those people who are close to him, who should be the ones he loves and has immense amount of grace for, and make him self-righteous and judgmental. So that's best I understand chapter 3. I'm not going to do this every week, just so you know. I'm not going to run us through these. I wanted to get to chapter 4 because I think chapter 4 is hard to read, and so I'll say a couple things about it, and then we'll be done for tonight. My dear Wormwood, I do like this piece. The amateurish suggestion in your last letter warned me that it is high time for me to write you fully on this painful subject of prayer. Now, this is a little line. You might have spared me the comment that my advice about his prayers for his mother proved singularly unfortunate. That is not the sort of thing a nephew should write his uncle, nor a junior tempter to the undersecretary of a department. It also reveals an unpleasant desire to shift responsibility. You must learn to pay for your own blunders. He's slapping Wormwood down. Stop correcting me. The best thing, where it is possible, is to keep the patient from serious intention of prayer altogether. That's his starting goal, but he's going to recognize that's not going to work. When the patient is an adult recently reconverted to the enemy's party, like your man, this is best done by encouraging him to remember, or to think he remembers, the parrot-like nature of his prayers in childhood. In reaction against that, he may be persuaded to aim at something entirely spontaneous, inward, informal, and unregularized. And what this will actually mean to a beginner will be an effort to produce in him a vaguely devotional mood in which real concentration of will and intelligence has no part. Any idea what he's saying there? It's pretty chunky. What he's trying to get you to see is something in our society that's so prevalent, and we as every individual is going to have to decide whether C.S. Lewis is right about this. But Lewis is saying that casual, easy chair prayer is of no value. That's what he's saying. He's going to take the next section, and when Judy and I read this, we had to kind of go, well, I don't know what I think about some of this. But if I'm going to read a little piece of it to you again. He may be persuaded to aim at something spontaneous. Now, you might be hearing this going, what's wrong with that? Because I might too. Spontaneous, inward, informal, and unregularized. What this will actually mean to a beginner will be an effort to produce in himself a vaguely devotional mood in which real concentration of will and intelligence have no part. What I think he's saying is that prayer takes work. And that's and I'm going to say, for me, I don't entirely agree. I do think there's a place for this kind of casual dialogue with God. And there's a place for what Lewis is talking about, which I think is probably more what our generation may have lost. And I'd actually sometime would love to talk with you, Sarah, because you had made a couple of comments in terms of pressing in with God that I would love to hear more about. That I think for me, that idea of real concentration of will and intelligence in prayer means that I'm thinking, God, what do I need to pray about? And I am willing myself to focus on that. Full honesty, I'm not good at that. I am pretty good at, God, I need help with this. And if you've got some ideas, I'd love to hear them. And God, I know Terry's going on vacation. Be with Terry and Caitlin. But focused, willful, difficult prayer, I'm not an expert on. And when I'm reading this chapter, which is hard to read, I think what Lewis is arguing is the church 70 years ago was slipping away from difficult prayer into casual prayer. And you will have to make your own decisions on that. So I'm going to read a little bit more. One of their poets, Coleridge, has recorded that he did not pray with moving lips and bended knees, but merely composed his spirit to love. You hear this a lot, right? You even hear this as an argument against some Christians. Like, oh, Jesus is all about love. You just got to focus on love. Composed his spirit to love and indulged a sense of supplication. That is exactly the sort of prayer we want. And since it bears a superficial resemblance to the prayer of silence as practiced by those who are very advanced in the enemy's service, clever and lazy patience can be taken in by it for quite a long time. What he's talking about is that feel-good prayer. And I do hear often from people, man, I just don't feel anything sometimes. I pray and I don't feel anything. And I'm not going to comment, positive or negative, because I can say the same thing. And when I get done with reading chapter 4 here, Lewis, I think, is saying, stop worrying about what you feel and focus on the work of prayer. So I'll read a little bit more. Where was I at? At the very least, they could be persuaded that the bodily position makes no difference to their prayers, for they constantly forget that you must always remember that they are animals, and that whatever their bodies do affect their souls. I don't know that I agree with that. You will have to decide for yourself. It's funny how mortals always picture us putting things into their minds. I love this line. The reality, our best work is done by keeping things out, keeping them from thinking about things. I found myself after reading chapter 4 to not want to think about, and I like to think about stuff. I was like, man, this is a hard chapter. And I was honestly nervous that it would burn our group out, that we would read this chapter and go, I don't know if I want to do this book. Because maybe your experience was very different, but mine with this was a hard chapter. If this fails, you must fall back on subtler misdirection. Whenever they are attending to the enemy himself, we are defeated, but there are ways of preventing them from doing so. The simplest is to turn their gaze away from him towards themselves. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings there by the actions of their own wills. If I do this or I do that, I'm going to feel spiritual or joyful, whatever it might be. When they are meant to ask him for charity, pay attention to this. When they are meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings for themselves and not to notice that this is what they're doing. When they're meant to pray for courage, he's saying when they're meant to ask God for something, have them try to create it themselves. And this is important. This is what Grant was mentioning earlier, that we can't defeat Satan on our own. We can't resist the devil on our own. You can resist the devil through God. When we are, oh man, I just don't know how to forgive that person. Okay, well, just say the words. No, what we're supposed to do is ask God to put forgiveness into my heart. I can't create forgiveness. I need to ask God, oh God, help me. I'm going to just try and feel forgiving. Yeah, I forgive Steve for bringing a scale to the meeting. Okay, I feel better. As opposed to, God, I need your help to build this in me. And what happens then is we lose this need for God, that we just can muster up feelings. So I very much agree with a lot of what he's saying. I don't know, for me, that I'm convinced that I have to be kneeling to pray earnestly, but it causes me an ability to focus that I don't have praying on my couch. When they say their prayers for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by the success in producing the desired feelings, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment. All right, we're going to stop there because I want to be as good on our time as we can be. I don't know if you struggled with chapter 4. The two reasons I struggled for it is I thought it was confusing, and I struggled with the ideas some. There will be more chapters like that, where it's like, I don't know if I even agree with him. It's okay if you don't. It's not the Bible. That's why we're having a conversation, and I will tell you there's some other things in here that's like, I'm not sure of that. But I think on the whole, the windows that he opens up for us to see what the enemy's doing in us are significant. So, what I'd like us to do for this week is read chapters 5, how many is 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we're 6 letters. That's 1 a day with taking a day off. I'm going to reemphasize, you don't have to understand every one of them. You don't have to do the questions on every one of them. I'm going to encourage you to try to have 2 that you feel like you have a good grasp of. Any 2 from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sorry, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah. Try to have 2 of them where I feel like I know what this one's saying. I can answer these questions for those. If you got all of them, great. And next week what we're going to do is take a couple of them and split up so we're in smaller groups and just have a conversation. How did you see this? So I would encourage you to underline, write some notes on your papers like, oh, remember this line here or this line there. And most of what we do next week will be discussion oriented. So any questions? I don't think we will stream. So those folks, I don't see how we can stream small groups. So that we will put this online for anybody who wants to figure out how to get into this. But this will be the last week where we stream it. So if you need our address, we'll give it to you at the end of the broadcast. For the rest of you, we're going to close in prayer. And then, well, before we do, any comment or question?
What's A and B? I don't get it.
A and B is what do you do with that? How have you experienced it? So I mean, and being judgmental of the people I live with, boy, let me count the ways. And then how can I prepare myself against that?
Oh,
And
I see it.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
All 5 of those for each chapter.
Yeah,
For each.
that works for you. Yeah, and again, don't get hung. This is not a 4-credit class. If it's one of those chapters, like, man, I got nothing, no problem. If you got stuff going on, you can't be here 1 week, 2 weeks, come when you can. We'd love to have you, but please don't feel like, oh, I missed 2 weeks, I don't want to come back. You're welcome to be here when you can be here. So thank you for being here. I will close, and we'll be done right on time. God, thanks for these friends. Thanks for time to be together. I was going to say a fun time. I don't know if it was, but I hope it was informational. Trust you to lead us. Anything that's not useful in this book, have it just float away. But the things that are true, the things that are giving us insight into how the enemy picks at our mind and builds false foundations in our spirit, show us those. And show us not just the concept, but where he's done it to us. Help us to dig those things up and build on truth, the real truth that comes from you. Bless each one of these friends this week. Ask that you're drawing closer to them every day. In Jesus' name.